for the billionaire, until one day. The iron gate of Whitmore Estate was 12 feet tall, black and cold. It had stood at the edge of the property for over 100 years, separating the sprawling mansion from the rest of the world. Visitors needed appointments. Deliveries required clearance. Reporters were turned away before they even reached the intercom. The gate was not just a physical boundary, it was a statement. This world is not yours. Stay out. But nobody told that to Lily. Lily Chen was 3 years old, with dark pigtails that her mother tied every morning with mismatched rubber bands, one yellow, one pink, because Lily always lost the matching ones. She had round cheeks dusted with a permanent flush, tiny hands that were almost always sticky, and eyes so wide and dark they looked like 2 drops of midnight sky had fallen into her face. She was, by every measure, the smallest person on the Whitmore Estate grounds. And every single evening, at exactly 5:15, she waddled her way across the stone path from the staff cottage to that enormous iron gate and pressed her little nose between the bars. She was waiting. Her mother, Rosa Chen, worked as a live-in housekeeper for the estate. She had taken the position 2 years ago after Lily's father left. Quietly, without explanation, without even a note on the kitchen table. Rosa had packed what she could fit into 2 suitcases, strapped Lily into a second-hand car seat, and driven 3 hours to answer a job listing that paid well enough to save. The estate came with a small cottage on the grounds for live-in staff. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a slanted ceiling in the bathroom, a radiator that clicked and hissed through winter nights. But it had a door that locked and a yard where Lily could play, and that was enough. Rosa was a hard worker. Quiet, thorough, invisible in the way that good household staff learn to be. She scrubbed floors and folded linens and polished silverware that never got used, and she asked for nothing extra. The estate was mostly empty anyway. Its owner, Ethan Whitmore, was rarely home. Ethan Whitmore was 36 years old and worth somewhere in the range of $4.7 billion, depending on which magazine you asked. He had built his fortune in clean energy infrastructure, not by inheriting it, which was the first thing anyone who knew him would tell you, because Ethan himself never let anyone forget it. He had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati with a mother who worked double shifts and a father who had died of a heart attack at 44 from working too hard for too little. Everything Ethan had, he had clawed out of the earth with his own hands. He was not, by most accounts, a warm man. He was respected, certainly, feared in boardrooms, admired from a distance. But warm? The people who worked for him used words like demanding and precise and exacting. His 3 assistants rotated every 18 months because the pace was unsustainable. He didn't attend charity galas for the conversation. He attended because his publicist scheduled them and his donations were tax efficient. He had no wife, no girlfriend that anyone knew of, and no close friends that made the gossip columns. He came to the estate maybe twice a month, sometimes less. But Lily didn't know any of that. What Lily knew was this. 3 weeks ago, she had been standing at the gate on a Tuesday evening, pressing her nose through the bars the way she always did to watch the birds settle into the oak trees across the road, when a long black car had come rolling up the private driveway. The gate had opened automatically. The car had slowed, and the man inside had looked out the window. He had dark hair with the beginning of gray at the temples. He had tired eyes, the kind of tired that isn't fixed by sleeping. He wore a suit jacket and his collar was open at the top, like he'd pulled the tie off somewhere on the road. He looked, in that one unguarded moment, like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to come home. Lily had waved. Not a shy wave. Not a polite, uncertain flutter of fingers. A full, committed, both hands wave, the kind that involves the whole body. Her pigtails bouncing, her feet lifting off the ground, her whole face split open into a grin that showed the small gap where her bottom front tooth was just starting to grow in. The man had stared at her. Then, slowly, like a muscle that hadn't been used in a very long time, one corner of his mouth had moved. Not quite a smile. Not exactly. But something. The ghost of one. The car had moved through the gate. The gate had closed. And the next evening, at 5:15, Lily was back. She didn't fully understand why. Children that age don't traffic in reasons. She just knew that something about that window, that face, that almost smile had lodged itself in her chest like a small warm pebble. So she came back. And the evening after that, and the evening after that, Rosa noticed on the fourth day. She had been in the kitchen, separating laundry, when she looked out the window and saw Lily's small silhouette at the far end of the path, stationed at the gate like a little soldier. Rosa dried her hands and walked out, her heart doing a complicated thing in her chest. Lily, baby, what are you doing all the way over here? Lily pointed through the bars at the long driveway that curved through the trees. Waiting, she said, with complete seriousness. Waiting for what, sweetheart? Lily thought about this for a moment. Then she looked up at her mother with those midnight eyes and said, simply, the sad man. Rosa stood very still. What sad man? But Lily had already turned back to the gate, fingers wrapped around the iron bars, nose pressed through the gap, watching the driveway with the patient, unblinking certainty that only a 3-year-old can muster. The certainty that if you wait long enough, the thing you are hoping for will come. Rosa looked down at her daughter, then up at the gate, then back at her daughter. And she didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she sat down on the cold stone path and did a little of both. Ethan Whitmore arrived at the estate on a Thursday evening, 4 days after that first wave. He hadn't thought about the little girl. Or, more accurately, he had told himself he hadn't thought about her. There is a difference. He had been in 3 countries in 4 days, Singapore, Frankfurt, then a red-eye into JFK, and his calendar between now and the end of the month looked like a game of Tetris played by someone who hated him. He had things to think about. Contracts. Negotiations. A merger that was either going to make him significantly wealthier or significantly humiliated, depending on how Thursday went. He had no mental bandwidth for a 3-year-old at a gate. And yet, as Marcus, his driver, turned onto the private road and the estate gate appeared through the evening light, Ethan found himself, without meaning to, looking. She was there. Same pigtails. One yellow band. One pink. Same small hands wrapped around the bars. Same nose pressed into the gap, breath fogging in the October chill, cheeks red from the cold. She was wearing a tiny yellow raincoat that was slightly too big for her, the sleeves hanging past her wrists, and boots with frogs on them. She saw the car, and her entire face changed. It was like watching a light bulb turn on inside a person. She started waving before the car even reached the gate. Both arms, full effort, her whole body vibrating with it. She was saying something. Ethan could see her mouth moving, but the windows were up and he couldn't hear. He watched her. He didn't wave back. He didn't know why. His hand sat in his lap and didn't move, and the car rolled through the gate and up the driveway, and in the side mirror he could see her standing there, still watching, her little arms finally going still. Inside the mansion, Ethan stood in the entryway for a long moment. Diane, the estate manager, appeared with a folder of mail and the weekend's briefing notes. Welcome back, Mr. Whitmore. The Carlisle papers are on your desk, and the kitchen has dinner ready for 8 if that works for you. Who is the child at the gate? He asked. Diane blinked. Sir, the small girl. Dark pigtails. Yellow raincoat. She's been standing at the gate. Oh. Diane's expression shifted into something careful. That's Lily, Rosa Chen's daughter. Rosa is your Tuesday through Thursday housekeeper. She's live-in the East Cottage. Lily must have gotten out to the front path. She paused. I can make sure it doesn't happen again if you prefer. No, Ethan said. Diane waited. Don't do that, he said, and walked toward his office. He told himself, sitting at his desk with the Carlisle folder open in front of him, that it was simply a matter of the child's safety. Small children wandering near estate gates was a liability issue. He should be informed about it. That was all. He read the same paragraph of the Carlisle agreement 4 times without absorbing a single word. What he kept seeing, instead, was the moment her face had changed when she saw the car. That instantaneous, uncalculated, full-body joy. He hadn't seen anyone look at him like that and he couldn't finish the thought. He genuinely couldn't locate the last time. People looked at him with many things. Respect sometimes, calculation often, occasionally fear, which he'd long since stopped feeling bad about. His mother looked at him with love, but the strained, worried kind. The kind that always came wrapped in "Are you sleeping enough?" and "You look too thin." His board members looked at him with assessment. His competitors looked at him with envy, wearing the costume of contempt. Nobody looked at him like it was simply, uncomplicatedly good that he had appeared. He closed the folder. He went to the window. The front path was empty now. The gate was still. The oak trees across the road moved slowly in the wind, and the last gray light of the evening was dissolving into dark. Somewhere on the grounds, in the East Cottage, a little girl in a yellow raincoat with frog boots was probably eating dinner or being put to bed, entirely unaware of the grown man standing in a dark study thinking about the way she waved. The sad man. He didn't know how he knew she had said that. He hadn't been able to hear her through the glass. But somehow, standing at that window, he understood that was what it had been. He felt it in a place he didn't have a name for. He was sad. He hadn't admitted that to anyone. Not to his mother. Not to his therapist, whom he saw 4 times a year like a dental cleaning, dutifully, perfunctorily, without real honesty. Not to Marcus, who had driven him for 6 years and probably knew him better than most. Not to himself, in the plain and simple language it deserved. He was 36 years old. He had more money than he could spend in 4 lifetimes. He had built something real, something that mattered, something that would outlast him. And he came home to this enormous, beautiful, silent house and felt nothing but the specific weight of a life that had been filled with achievement and emptied of everything else. A 3-year-old had seen it through a car window in 3 seconds flat. He almost laughed. He almost didn't. He went to dinner alone, as he always did, and the food was excellent, as it always was, and the dining room was quiet enough that he could hear the clock in the hallway marking every second. The next evening at 5:15, he found himself standing near the front window, watching. She was there. Yellow raincoat, frog boots, pigtails. And this time, when she waved, Ethan Whitmore raised his hand and waved back. The sound that came out of that tiny person, he heard it even through the glass. A shriek of pure, undiluted delight. She jumped up and down so hard her pigtails smacked her in the face, and she didn't even care. Ethan stood at the window with his hand still raised. And the thing that moved through his chest in that moment, he didn't have a word for it either. But it was warm. It was embarrassingly, unexpectedly warm. And it had been a very long time since he had felt anything in that particular register at all. It was a Saturday in November when Ethan first spoke to Lily. The morning had started badly. He'd been on a call with his legal team since 6 a.m., a dispute with a European contractor that had calcified into something expensive and tedious, and by 9 the call had ended inconclusively, leaving him with a particular frustration of a problem that had no clean solution yet. He'd poured his coffee down the sink because it had gone cold while he was arguing, and he'd stood in the kitchen of his enormous house with his hands braced on the counter and his jaw tight, trying to remember why he did any of this. He had walked outside because the walls were pressing in. The grounds of Whitmore Estate were beautiful in November, a different kind of beautiful than summer, quieter and more honest. The oaks stripped down to their architecture, the morning frost on the grass catching the low sun like scattered glass. Ethan walked without direction, hands in the pockets of his dark jacket, following the stone path that curved through the grounds. He heard her before he saw her. A small, very serious voice, narrating something to itself. He rounded the curve of the hedge and found Lily sitting cross-legged in the middle of the path, approximately 20 feet from the gate. She had a collection of acorns arranged in front of her in a pattern that seemed to have internal logic he could not immediately discern. She was wearing a purple coat today and the frog boots and her pigtails. She was talking to the acorns. This one is the mama, she informed the largest acorn, in a tone that brooked no argument. And this one is the baby. And this one, she held up a small one with a particularly intact cap. This one is the one who was lost and then found. She hadn't seen him yet. Ethan stood very still. He was not, constitutionally, a person who knew what to do with small children. He had no siblings, no nieces or nephews. His social circle did not include people with toddlers, or if it did, the toddlers were kept somewhere separate from the adults, which was how he preferred it. Children were loud and unpredictable and operated on an emotional logic he had never been trained to navigate. But he didn't leave. Lily looked up. For 1/2 second, she just looked at him, her acorn suspended in her hand. Then her whole face opened up like a window being thrown wide on a spring morning. "Sad man," she announced, with enormous satisfaction, as if she had been proven right about something. Ethan stopped. "Hello." Lily scrambled to her feet with the urgent, uncoordinated energy of a child who has decided that standing is important right now. She came toward him, not shyly, not cautiously, but with the confident momentum of someone who has never considered the possibility of not being welcomed. She stopped about 2 feet in front of him and looked up at him with her midnight eyes. "You waved," she said. "I did," he agreed. She seemed to find this deeply satisfying. "I waved first," she clarified. "You did. Mama said I shouldn't bother you." She scrunched her nose. "Are you bothered?" Ethan looked down at this 3-year-old who had asked him, with complete directness, whether she was bothering him. No adult in recent memory had been that honest with him. "No," he said. "I'm not bothered." Lily immediately turned back to her acorns, dropping to her knees with a thud that should have hurt but apparently didn't. "You can sit," she said, as if granting an audience. Ethan looked at the stone path. He looked at his jacket. He thought about the conference call he should be reviewing notes from. He thought about the European contractor dispute. He sat down on the cold stone path. Lily handed him an acorn without preamble. "You're the found one," she told him. He looked at the small acorn in his palm. "Why?" She thought about this with the genuine seriousness of a child who respects a good question. "Because," she said finally, "you look like you were lost for a long time." The morning was very quiet. A bird moved through the stripped oak above them. The frost on the grass caught the light. Ethan Whitmore sat on a cold stone path with an acorn in his hand, and he could not think of a single thing to say. Not because he was lost for words. He was a man who spoke for a living, who had delivered keynote addresses and navigated congressional hearings and deposed hostile witnesses. Words were his tools. But this child had just said, plainly and without cruelty, something that no one in his professional life or personal life or a therapist's chair had managed to say in 6 years. And the precision of it had gone straight through him like an arrow finding a gap in the armor. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a moment. Lily looked up. "Yes." "Why do you wait at the gate?" She considered this with her full attention, the way children do when they understand that a question deserves a real answer. Then she said, "Because when I wave and you wave back, you look less sad." He didn't answer for a long time. "Does that make sense?" she asked. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It does." She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her acorns. They sat together on the cold stone path for another 20 minutes. Lily narrated the Acorn family's ongoing situation. They were building a house, apparently, and had encountered some zoning issues with a pine cone, and Ethan listened with more genuine attention than he had given most things in recent memory. At some point Rosa appeared at the far end of the path, saw the scene, and went absolutely still. When she finally approached, her face was a mixture of horror and something more complicated underneath. "Lily's sweetheart. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry, Mr. Whitmore. She's not supposed to be out here. I was just..." "She's fine," Ethan said. He got to his feet, looked at Rosa, who was small and tired-looking in the specific way of single mothers, with kind eyes and worry written permanently in the set of her shoulders. She's been keeping me company. Rosa opened her mouth, closed it. Lily looked up at Ethan with her midnight eyes. Same time tomorrow? She asked. Rosa made a small sound of mortification. Ethan looked down at the 3-year-old with the acorn family and the frog boots and the complete absence of any social anxiety whatsoever, and he said something he hadn't expected to say. Same time tomorrow. November became December, and something quiet changed at Whitmore Estate. It didn't announce itself. It didn't come with fanfare or dramatic declaration. It came the way real change usually comes, slowly, then suddenly, in small accumulations that only become visible when you look back at them. It started with the mornings. Ethan began taking his coffee outside. He told himself it was because the kitchen felt too closed in, and that was partially true. But the deeper truth was that on the mornings when he was at the estate, there was usually a small person somewhere on the grounds, and the small person was good company. Lily kept her own schedule, governed by laws only she fully understood, but she had a gravitational field that Ethan found himself orbiting without having consciously decided to. She would appear at the kitchen door while he was on a call and wait, with extreme patience, holding a leaf or a particularly interesting rock, and when he got off the call, she would present it to him with the seriousness of a geologist presenting a breakthrough discovery. He had developed, on the windowsill of his study, a small collection for acorns, 2 smooth gray stones, a jay feather, and a piece of red glass Lily had found near the garden wall that she had declared was probably from a castle. He didn't examine this collection too closely. He just knew that when he sat at his desk and looked at those small, ordinary objects, something in his chest loosened slightly. Rosa watched all of it with a mixture of emotions she couldn't fully sort. She was grateful. Of course she was. Mr. Whitmore had been nothing but kind in his quiet, contained way, and the fact that he tolerated Lily's presence rather than filing a formal complaint with Diane was more than she had any right to expect. She had braced for trouble. She had braced for a polite but firm conversation about appropriate boundaries for staff children. Instead, her 3-year-old had somehow charmed the most formidable man Rosa had ever worked for, and he was now sitting on the estate grounds looking at rocks. But underneath the gratitude was fear. Not fear of him. Fear for Lily. Lily was attaching. Rosa knew the signs. She had lived through one catastrophic attachment before, when Lily was 18 months old and Rosa had briefly dated a man named James who had been gentle with Lily for 4 months and then disappeared, and the aftermath had been long and painful and had lived in Lily's behavior for almost a year. Lily was a child who loved easily, completely, and without protection, and she was, very clearly, falling in love with this man who would eventually go back to his real life and not come back. Rosa lay awake about this. She brought it up, carefully, obliquely, on a Tuesday evening when she was finishing the upstairs cleaning and Ethan passed through the hallway. It wasn't planned. She hadn't scripted it. She just looked at him and said, quietly, "She's going to miss you. When things change." He stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. "Nothing's changed," he said. "I know," Rosa said. "I just wanted you to know that she won't understand when it does. She's 3. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere downstairs the old clock ticked. "I know she's 3, he said. And then, "I'm not going to hurt her." He said it plainly, not defensively, with a simplicity that Rosa recognized, after a moment, as the same register her daughter used. And she nodded, and he walked on, and she stood in the hallway with her cleaning cloth and tried to decide whether to believe him. What she didn't know, what she couldn't see from where she was standing, was that the same fear was living in Ethan. Not fear for Lily. Fear about himself. He had not had something to lose in a very long time. He had things to protect: his company, his reputation, his mother's comfort, his legacy. But those were structures. They were built to outlast him. They didn't look at him across a plate of cut apple slices with jam and ask, completely seriously, whether he thought fish dreamed. Lily was small and temporary in the way all things that are alive are temporary. And he had somehow, in the space of 6 weeks, started to love her. He hadn't named it. He would not have named it if asked. He was a man who processed his interior life with extreme reluctance and considerable delay. But it was there, warm and terrifying and real, in the way he checked the grounds when he arrived at the estate, scanning for a small purple coat. In the way he had asked Marcus to stop at a bookstore because he'd heard Lily say she liked frogs, and had spent 15 awkward minutes in the children's section being judged by a 20-year-old employee before selecting a book about frogs that was apparently very good, according to the internet reviews he'd read 4 times on his phone. He'd left it at the cottage door without a note. Rosa had figured out where it came from. She'd said nothing. But the next morning Lily had appeared at the kitchen door while he was on a call and held up the book with both hands and beamed at him with that full body, whole face beam until he had to put the call on mute to compose himself. He was in trouble and he knew it. What he didn't know, not yet, was that the trouble had 2 parts. The small girl who had walked into his life without asking, and her mother, who stood at the edges of it, worried and careful, with kind eyes and tired shoulders, and who had said she's going to miss you with the voice of someone who knew what loss felt like from the inside. Ethan sat at his desk that night and didn't open his laptop. He sat for a long time in the quiet of the house that no longer felt quite as empty as it used to. It was the 2nd week of December, and Ethan came home on a Wednesday evening. He had been in Boston for 2 days, a meetings-only trip, overnight, the kind he could do in his sleep. Marcus pulled through the gate at 5:20. Ethan looked at the path. It was empty. He told himself that was fine. Lily kept her own schedule. She was a 3-year-old, not an appointment. He went inside, changed out of his travel clothes, checked his messages, made himself coffee, stood at the kitchen window. The path was still empty at 6. He ate dinner at his desk, read through the evening's briefings. The clock in the hallway ticked. By 7:30, he was standing in the front hallway, and he could not have explained to anyone's satisfaction why he was standing there. He opened the front door. The night was cold. A light was on in the east cottage. He stood on the step for a moment, feeling acutely ridiculous. He was 36 years old, and the founder of a company that provided clean energy infrastructure to 11 countries, and he was standing on his front step in the dark because a toddler hadn't waved at him, and he was, what? Concerned? He was concerned. He crossed the grounds, knocked on the cottage door. Rosa answered. Her eyes were red. The bottom fell out of everything immediately. What happened? He said. Rosa blinked. She had clearly not expected him. Mr. Whitmore. What's wrong? Where's Lily? Rosa's face did something complicated. She stepped back from the door. She's okay, she said, quickly because she could see his face. She's sick. She has a fever. The doctor came this afternoon. It's an ear infection. She has antibiotics. She's going to be completely fine. The relief was so swift and physical it almost moved through him visibly. She's okay, he repeated. She's okay, Rosa confirmed. She was upset earlier because she was too sick to go to the gate. Rosa paused. She was worried you'd think she forgot. He stood in the doorway of the cottage, this big man in the cold doorframe of the small stone cottage. The cottage was warm inside. He could see the edges of it, the small kitchen with its crooked cabinets, a child's drawings on the refrigerator, a lamp on a side table casting a yellow circle of light. Can I see her? He asked. Rosa went very still. He hurt himself. He understood that this was a line, that a man in his position asking to see a sick employee's child in her home at 7:30 in the evening was a thing that required careful thought. He was about to step back, to apologize, to reframe. She'd want to see you, Rosa said quietly. Lily was in the bedroom, tucked under a blanket that had cartoon elephants on it, her cheeks flushed with fever, her hair loose from the pigtails. She looked small in the way that sick children look smaller than usual, fragile in a way that squeezed something in Ethan's chest so hard it hurt. She looked up when he came in, and even sick, even feverish, her face did that thing. That window thrown open thing. You came, she said. Her voice was rough and small. I came, he said. My ears hurt, she told him, with great seriousness. I know. I'm sorry. The medicine is yucky. Most medicine is. She considered this. Did you have yucky medicine when you were little? Yeah, he said. I did. He had pulled the small wooden chair from the corner of the room and sat next to the bed. This was not a thing he had decided to do. His body had simply done it. Rosa stood in the doorway, watching. She wasn't sure she was breathing normally. Will you stay? Lily asked. Just for a little? For a little, he said. He stayed for an hour and a half. He read the frog book, which Lily had apparently had Rosa retrieve from the living room specifically, 3 times through. Lily fell asleep halfway through the third read, her small fist loose on the blanket, her breathing gradually deepening into the steady rhythm of sleep. Ethan sat in the small wooden chair with the frog book in his hands and the lamplight warm around him and didn't move for a long time. Rosa came back in after a while and stood in the doorway. He looked up at her. She looked at him, at her sleeping daughter, at him. Something was happening in Rosa's chest that she had not given herself permission to examine. It had been building for weeks in the margins of her days. In the moment she'd looked out the window and seen him sitting on the cold stone path beside Lily and her acorns, in the way he'd said, I'm not going to hurt her in the hallway, in the quietly left frog book at the cottage door, in the fact that this man, this enormous, self-contained, unreachable man, had crossed his own grounds in the dark because a 3-year-old hadn't been at the gate. She loves you, Rosa said, barely above a whisper. Ethan looked down at Lily. I know. A beat of quiet. I don't know what to do with that, he said. His voice was low and honest, the careful armor of it gone for once. Rosa watched him for a moment. Then she crossed the small room and sat on the edge of Lily's bed and she said, Neither do I. They sat there together in the lamplight, the sleeping child between them, and nobody said anything else for a while. They didn't need to. Something had been said in the silence that neither of them could take back, and both of them knew it, and neither of them tried. Christmas came to Whitmore Estate quietly that year. Ethan had not decorated for Christmas in 3 years. It was an efficiency decision. He was rarely home for the holidays, and the staff shouldn't have to manage a fully decorated house when nobody was there to see it. But on December 15th, he had arrived home to find Lily standing in the front hallway with a red paper chain she had made herself, both arms extended, offering it to him with the solemn ceremonial weight of a child presenting a crown. For the house, she had informed him. The house now had a red paper chain on the mantel in the main sitting room. Then there was a small wreath on the kitchen door that Lily had made from branches and yarn, which listed slightly to the left. And a drawing on the refrigerator, Ethan's refrigerator, in his kitchen, that depicted, according to Lily, you and me and Mama and the gate, rendered in red and purple crayon. In the drawing, all 3 figures held hands. They were roughly the same height. The gate was enormous. Ethan had looked at the drawing for a long time. On December 22nd, Rosa knocked on the study door in the evening. This was unusual. She had a quiet, clear instinct about when to be present and when to be invisible, and she rarely sought him out directly. He called her in. She stood in the doorway looking like she'd rehearsed this, and then abandoned the script. I want to say something, she said. Okay. She paused, searching. This is not something I expected. When I took this job, this is not the kind of thing I planned on. I want you to know that I haven't. Another pause. I haven't been trying to put you in a situation. With Lily. I know this is your house and your life, and I would never. Rosa, he said. She stopped. I know that, he said. He held her gaze across the room. That's not what this is. Then what is it? She asked. Quietly. Genuinely. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know the name for it, he said finally. But I know it's the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. Rosa stood very still. The fire in the study hearth moved. The old clock ticked. Somewhere in the cottage, Lily was asleep under her elephant blanket. She asked me, Rosa said, if Santa could bring her papa. The silence after that was the kind that fills a room completely, the way water fills a glass. Ethan stood up from his desk. He crossed the room slowly. He stopped in front of her, close enough to see the exact quality of her exhaustion, the exact quality of her hope, the exact quality of the fear underneath both. "What did you tell her?" he asked. "I told her Santa deals in toys." Rosa's voice was unsteady. He looked at her for a long moment. "And what do you deal in?" Her eyes filled. "I don't know yet," she said. He reached out and took her hand. Just her hand. Held it carefully, like something he didn't want to damage. "I have not been good at this," he said. "At any of this. I've been alone so long I stopped believing there was another option." "I don't," he stopped. Started again. "I don't have a roadmap for this. But I know that I wake up on the mornings when I'm here, and the first thing I do is listen for her. And I know that you looked me in the eyes in a hallway and told me the truth when you didn't have to, and I've been thinking about that ever since." He paused. "I know that this house was empty for years, and now there is a paper chain on my mantle and a drawing on my refrigerator, and I would not trade either of them for anything I own." Rosa was crying. She wasn't trying not to. The tears came the way they come when something has been held tight for a long time and is finally allowed to be set down. "She's going to wake up Christmas morning," Rosa said, "and she's going to run to the gate." "I'll be there," he said. "She's going to want you to stay." "I know. And Rosa stopped, looked at him. "I want you to stay too." He brought her hand to his chest, held it there. "Then I'll stay," he said. "If that's something we can build." Slowly, carefully, the right way. Rosa nodded. "The right way," she agreed. On Christmas morning, a light snow fell across the grounds of Whitmore Estate, thin and soft, the kind that settles on everything and makes the world look like something remembered from childhood. At 7:15, before breakfast, before presents, before anything else, a small person in an elf-patterned pajama set and, inexplicably, the frog boots, came running down the stone path toward the gate. She stopped when she saw him already standing there. He was in his jacket, coffee in hand, breath fogging in the cold air. He had been there for 10 minutes before she arrived, not because anyone asked him to, but because he had woken up and known. Lily stood there in her elf pajamas and her frog boots and looked at him. Then she looked at her mother, who had come out behind her, wrapped in her coat, cheeks flushed in the cold. Then she looked back at Ethan. "You're on the inside," she said. He looked at where he was standing, inside the gate, on the grounds at the beginning of the stone path. He had been outside, in every way that mattered, for a very long time. He hadn't noticed the moment he'd stepped through. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Lily opened both arms. He went down to one knee on the cold stone path, and she ran the remaining 10 feet and hit him like a small freight train, her arms around his neck, her pigtails in his face, and he caught her the way you catch something you cannot afford to drop. He held on. Rosa stood at the edge of the path with her hands over her mouth. Lily pulled back just far enough to look at his face with her midnight eyes. "You're not sad anymore," she announced with total authority. And Ethan Whitmore, who had built $4.7 billion from nothing, who had never cried in a boardroom, who had held himself together through losses and setbacks and years of the specific silence of an empty house, felt his eyes go bright and hot. "No," he said. "I'm not." She patted his cheek with one small hand, satisfied. Then she squirmed down, grabbed one of his hands and one of her mother's, and stood between them at the gate where she had waited, every evening at 5:15, for a sad man who just needed someone to wave at him. "Merry Christmas," she said. The snow fell. The gate stood open behind them. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Ethan Whitmore was exactly